There is a square of turned soil behind an ordinary house, no bigger than a kitchen table, and the person who tends it is 91 years old and has not been to a doctor for anything serious in almost 20 years. That patch of ground should not matter. It does. When researchers went looking for the people who reached their late 70s, their 80s, their 90s without the illnesses we have been taught to accept as simply the cost of getting old, they expected to find good genes or money or some expensive secret nobody had told the rest of us. They found something far stranger. Again and again behind those houses, they kept finding the same thing. A backyard. A small one. Half wild, half tended, always in use. By the time this ends, you will know exactly what those researchers found, and why it had almost nothing to do with the food that came out of that soil. You will know the one plain habit these people shared, the thing so small that most of them never thought to mention it when asked, and why doctors are only now starting to admit it may matter more than half the advice printed on the side of a pill bottle. Keep that square of soil in your mind. We are going to come back to it at the very end, and it will mean something different by then. Here is what stopped the researchers cold. It was not that these people ate better, though some of them did. It was not that they were wealthy, because most of them were not. It was not even that they moved more in the way a treadmill would measure it. There was one number in the early data that made no sense at all, a number that should not have been possible if aging worked the way we were told it does. It sat in the results like a typo. For years, everyone assumed it was a mistake. It was not a mistake. Think about the oldest person you have ever known who stayed sharp and steady right to the end. Not frail, not fading in a chair, still themselves. Now try to remember what was behind their house. Odds are, if you can picture it at all, you can picture something growing. We have spent a fortune looking for the fountain of youth in laboratories and supplement bottles and clinics that charge more for a month than most people earn. And the whole time, in the plainest possible place, a few careful scientists kept tripping over the same quiet answer and not quite believing it. They did not believe it because it was too ordinary, too cheap, too available to everyone. There is a strange rule in how we treat our own health. If a thing is rare and costs a great deal, we assume it is powerful. If a thing is common and costs almost nothing, we assume it cannot be the answer, even when the evidence is standing right in front of us with dirt under its fingernails. So they kept the finding quiet at first. They ran it again. They controlled for everything they could think of: diet, income, education, whether the person had a partner, whether they smoked. And every time they stripped away another factor, the backyard was still standing there when the numbers settled, refusing to go away. The question that took over the next decade of their work was simple to ask and very hard to answer. What exactly was that patch of ground doing to the body of the person who tended it? Not the vegetables, the ground itself, and the daily act of bending over it. That is the question we are going to walk through, one piece at a time. What the soil does to your blood, what the morning does to your clock, what having something depend on you does to a brain that has been told it is no longer needed, and that one impossible number, the one that looked like a typo, and what it finally turned out to mean. Because when they understood it, some of them changed how they lived, not their patients, themselves. Slow down for a moment, because the way this began matters more than the headline it became. Nobody set out to study gardening. That is the part people miss. The first hints came sideways, out of studies designed to look at something else entirely. Researchers tracking heart disease in a few long-lived communities. Teams mapping who developed dementia and who did not in towns where people stayed put for generations. Nurses filling in the same tired questionnaires about diet and exercise and whether the patient drank. The backyard was never a question on those forms. It showed up anyway. It showed up in the margins, in the offhand comments, in the throwaway line at the end of an interview when the recorder was almost switched off. I still do my patch every morning. I go out and see to the beans. Nothing to it, really. Nothing to it. That phrase, over and over, from people who by every rule of the actuarial table should have been gone a decade earlier. Picture one of those interviews. A researcher with a clipboard, sitting in a small kitchen, running down the list. Blood pressure, medications, family history, the usual. The person across the table answers everything patiently, then glances out the window at the beds while they talk, checking on something the researcher cannot see. At the end comes the throwaway line, almost an apology for wasting the time. The researcher writes it in the margin because there is no box for it on the form. Years later, someone reading a stack of those margins notices they all say nearly the same thing and feels the hair stand up on the back of their neck. The most important data in the whole study had been written sideways, in the space the form left blank. When you gather enough of these throwaway lines in one place, a shape starts to form. And the shape was uncomfortable because it did not fit the story medicine likes to tell about itself. The story goes like this. You get old. Things break down. We intervene with drugs and procedures and we buy you time. The patient is a passenger. The doctor drives. But these people were not passengers. They were doing something every single day with their own two hands in the open air, and it seemed to be doing more for them than most of what the clinic could offer. That is a hard thing for a system built on intervention to swallow. So the first instinct, naturally, was to explain it away. It must be the food, they said. These people grow vegetables, they eat fresh produce, of course they are healthier, clean and simple, everyone relaxed. The finding fit back inside the story. Eat your greens, we already knew that. Except it did not hold. And the moment it stopped holding is the moment this stopped being a nutrition study and became something much harder to dismiss. Here is what broke it. When researchers looked closely at what these long-lived gardeners actually ate, it was not remarkable. Some of it came from the garden. Plenty did not. They ate bread. They ate meat. They had cake on Sundays. Their diets, measured on paper, looked a lot like their neighbors who were sick. And their neighbors are the key. Because right next door on the same street, eating roughly the same food, buying the same fresh vegetables from the same shops, were people aging exactly the way we expect. Stiffening, forgetting, fading. The food was not the difference. The food was available to everyone. The difference was who went outside and bent over the ground, and who did not. That was the moment a few of these researchers felt the floor shift under them. They had been looking for a substance, a nutrient, a compound, something you could isolate and bottle and sell. And the answer refused to be a substance. The answer was a behavior, an act, a verb, not a noun. You cannot patent a verb. You cannot prescribe one, not really, not in a 15-minute appointment. And you certainly cannot make anyone do it. That is probably why it stayed buried in the margins for so long, hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone stubborn enough to take it seriously. One of them did, and when they pulled the thread, the whole thing started to unravel in the most fascinating way, because it turned out the act of gardening was not doing one thing to the body. It was doing four. Quietly, all at once, every morning. And the first of the four begins before the person has even reached for a tool. Picture two houses side by side, same street, same year built, same low fence between them. Behind the first, someone buys a box of organic vegetables delivered to the door every week. Kale, tomatoes, herbs, the good stuff, more expensive than most people would spend. They eat it. They are careful. They do everything the magazines say. Behind the second, someone grows a scruffy patch of the same vegetables. Smaller harvest. Slugs get some of it. The tomatoes are not as pretty. And yet, 10 years on, it is the second person who is still climbing their own stairs without pausing, still remembering names, still themselves. If it were about the vegetables, this would make no sense. Both are eating them. One is arguably eating better ones, but the health did not follow the produce. It followed the growing. Sit with that because it goes against almost everything we are sold. We are trained to think of our health as a matter of inputs. What goes into the body? The right food, the right vitamin, the right molecule. Health as consumption. You buy the correct things and you swallow them and you get well. But the people in these studies were not being kept alive by what they consumed. They were being kept alive by what they did. The doing was the medicine. The vegetables were almost a side effect. This is the quiet turn at the center of everything the researchers found, and it is worth saying plainly. The garden does not heal you by feeding you. It heals you by requiring you. Think about what a small patch of ground actually asks of a body over a year. It asks you to be outside in the early light. It asks you to kneel and rise, dozens of times, in a way no gym instructor would ever design but a body deeply understands. It asks you to carry water, to reach, to twist, to grip. It asks you to pay attention to something outside your own head. It asks you to come back tomorrow because the thing you planted is not finished with you. None of that is on a nutrition label. All of it turns out to matter. Here is a number worth holding onto. In several of these studies, people who did regular low-intensity gardening, nothing strenuous, just steady daily pottering, showed markers of health that matched people 10 to 15 years younger who did no such thing. Not from the food, from the activity, the light, the soil, and the reason to keep going. We will get to each of those. And notice what kind of activity it is. It is not exercise in the way we have come to dread that word. Nobody is counting reps. Nobody is watching a clock, pushing through, hating every second, waiting for it to be over. The person in the garden has forgotten they are moving at all. They are just seeing to the beans. The body is working hard and the mind thinks it is at rest. That combination, effort without dread, is almost impossible to fake in a gym, and it turns out to be worth a great deal. There is an old saying that the best exercise is the one you will actually do. The garden solved that problem centuries before anyone coined the phrase. You do it because something is waiting for you, not because a plan told you to. So if it is not the vegetables, and it is not exercise as we usually mean it, what is the first thing the garden does to the body of the person who steps outside at dawn? It has to do with light, and with a clock inside you that most people have quietly broken without ever knowing it was there. Go back to that patch of turned soil early, when the grass is still wet and the air has not warmed yet. The person is out there before most of the street is awake, not because they are disciplined, because that is when the garden wants them. Inside every one of us there is a clock, not a feeling, an actual mechanism, wired into the brain and echoed in nearly every organ you have. It decides when you are alert and when you are tired, when your body repairs itself, when it releases the hormones that wake you and the ones that let you sleep. For most of human history, that clock was set by one thing: light. The sun came up, hit your eyes, and told the whole system it was morning. Everything downstream fell into line. Now think about how most people over 60 actually start the day. Indoors, curtains half drawn. The first light they meet is a screen or a bulb. They may not get real outdoor light on their eyes for hours, sometimes not at all on a bad day in winter. The clock never gets its signal. It drifts. And a drifting clock is not a small thing. It is tangled up with poor sleep, with mood, with blood sugar, with the slow inflammation that sits underneath so many of the diseases we blame purely on age. The gardener does not know any of this. They just go outside in the morning. But in doing it, they hand their body the one signal it has been waiting for since before we had language. Bright early light, straight in the eyes at the same time every day. The clock locks on. Sleep gets deeper. The hormone that should peak in the morning peaks in the morning. The whole rhythm tightens up, and a tight rhythm is one of the quietest predictors of aging well that we have. That is the first thing the garden does, and the person never feels it happen. Consider how much we now spend trying to fake this signal. There are lamps sold for the price of a week of groceries, engineered to mimic a sunrise, marketed to people whose clocks have drifted so far they can no longer wake or sleep on time. They work, more or less, but they are a copy of a thing the gardener gets for nothing, in higher quality, the moment they step outside. Real morning light is many times brighter than anything a bulb can throw, and it carries a spread of wavelengths no device fully reproduces. The person kneeling in the wet grass is bathing in the exact signal the rest of us are paying to imitate indoors, and they would be baffled to learn there was a machine for it. But there is a second layer folded into the same morning, and it is movement of a very particular kind. We have been taught to think of exercise as intensity. Get the heart pounding, feel the burn, and there is a place for that. But it turns out that for a body in its later decades, the thing that matters most is not the hard hour 3 times a week. It is the absence of long, unbroken stillness across the whole day. It is standing up often. It is gentle, frequent, low-load movement. Bending, reaching, carrying a little, kneeling, rising. The garden is a machine for exactly that. It scatters movement across the morning without ever announcing it. You are not doing a set. You are moving a pot, then noticing a weed, then stretching for the far corner, then crouching to look at a shoot, then straightening to see the sky. Hours of this pass and the body has been quietly working the entire time. in the varied, unpredictable, natural way it was built to move, the way a chair and a screen never allow. There is a paradox here that the long-lived gardeners embody without trying. They are not fit in the way we measure fitness. Ask one to run and they will laugh at you. But they almost never stop moving, all day, gently, and that steady low hum of motion protects them in a way the occasional heroic workout does not. So already, before we have even touched the soil itself, the morning in the garden has reset an ancient clock and threaded movement through the whole day. And now comes the strangest part of all. What happens when the hands actually go into the dirt? Because the ground, it turns out, is not dead at all. It is alive, and some of what lives in it gets into you. Kneel down with them now, hands in the soil, dirt working under the nails into the creases of the skin, a faint earthy smell rising up on a damp morning. Most people, when they picture this, feel a small flinch. Dirty, unhygienic, wash it off. That flinch may be one of the more expensive instincts modern life has taught us. Because a spoonful of healthy soil is not empty. It is one of the most crowded places on the planet. Billions of living organisms in a single handful, a vast invisible city of bacteria and fungi. And a few of those organisms have a strange and specific relationship with the human body, one that scientists stumbled onto almost by accident. And it starts to explain why the person with their hands in the dirt is not just fitter but calmer, steadier, less often sick. There is one soil bacterium in particular that has become famous in this small corner of research. Ordinary, everywhere. In every garden, on every root, breathed in on the dust of a dry bed or absorbed through the skin of a working hand. When researchers exposed the body to it, something happened that nobody expected. It triggered the release of serotonin, the same brain chemical that most antidepressants spend enormous effort trying to raise. The soil was doing it for free, through the simple act of being handled. Read that again. A common bacterium in ordinary dirt appears to nudge the brain toward the exact chemistry we pay billions to correct. Not as strongly as a drug, nobody is claiming that, but every single day, gently, for years. And unlike the drug, it comes bundled with light, movement, purpose, and a reason to be outside. That is one thread. Here is the other, and it may matter even more. The modern body, especially the modern older body, has an immune system that has grown twitchy and confused. It spends less time meeting the ordinary living world it evolved alongside, all that soil and plant matter and honest microbial mess, and more time in scrubbed, sealed indoor air. And an immune system that rarely meets the outside world does not go quiet. It gets jumpy. It starts to react to the wrong things, to turn inward, to smolder. That low chronic inflammation is now suspected to sit under a shocking range of the diseases we file under aging. Heart trouble, failing memory, stiff and aching joints, the slow decline itself. The gardener, without any idea they are doing it, is dosing themselves daily with the exact opposite of a sterile life. They are shaking hands with the living world every morning. Their immune system stays in conversation with the soil, the pollen, the countless harmless organisms it was designed to know. And a system in that ongoing conversation tends to stay calm. It reacts less. It smolders less. It ages slower. This is the point where a few of those researchers stopped thinking of the backyard as a nice hobby and started thinking of it as something closer to a treatment they had no way to prescribe. You cannot write a script for a handful of living soil. You cannot bottle the morning. But the effect was sitting right there in the blood work, quietly undeniable. And there is a cruel irony in how the modern world has responded to all of this. We heard the word bacteria and we declared war. We wrapped ourselves in a life of antibacterial sprays and sealed windows and scrubbed surfaces, convinced that a cleaner world was a safer one. For the genuinely dangerous organisms, that war saved countless lives, and thank goodness for it. But somewhere along the way, we stopped drawing the line between the handful of microbes that harm us and the vast living world that made us. We treated all of it as the enemy, and an older body kept in that sealed, clean silence, never meeting the honest dirt it grew up alongside, is not protected. It is starved of the very conversation that kept it calm. The gardener never got that message. They kept shaking hands with the soil, and the soil kept them well. And yet the soil and the light and the movement, powerful as they are, still did not fully explain that impossible number from the beginning, the one that looked like a typo. Because that number was not really about the body at all. It was about something the body cannot survive well without, and it has nothing to do with dirt. There is a particular kind of mourning that arrives in a life after a certain point, and almost nobody warns you about it. The obligations thin out. The work that structured the days is behind you or fading. The people who needed you most 20 years ago, and you wake up and the day is open and open in the wrong way. Not free, empty. There is nothing that will notice whether you get up or not, nothing waiting, nothing depending on you. That morning is more dangerous than we admit, because a body that has no reason to get up starts very quietly to stop. Not all at once. It just begins to power down the systems it decides it no longer needs. This is not poetry. You can see it in the research. Loss of purpose in later life tracks with faster decline, with weaker immunity, with earlier death, as reliably as many things we treat as purely physical. Now put a garden into that morning. Because a garden does something almost nothing else in a quiet later life still does. It needs you, not sentimentally, practically. The seedlings will dry out if you do not come. The beans will go to waste on the vine. The thing you planted 3 weeks ago has reached the exact moment where it lives or dies based on whether you walk out that door this morning. Something depends on you again. Something small and green and alive is, in the most literal sense, waiting. That is the fourth thing the garden does, and it may be the one that ties all the others together. It gives a body under no obligation a reason to rise. And a body with a reason to rise behaves completely differently from one without. It gets up earlier, which delivers the morning light. It moves more, which threads the day with motion. It goes outside, which puts hands in the soil. Purpose is not a separate benefit sitting alongside the physical ones. Purpose is the engine that drives you toward all of them, every single day, on the mornings you would otherwise have stayed in the chair. Ask one of these long-lived gardeners why they still do it at 90 with aching knees when they could buy the vegetables for almost nothing. They rarely say anything grand. They say the tomatoes need me. They say I like to see how the roses came on overnight. They say who else is going to do it. And underneath those plain answers is one of the most protective forces known to a human life, being needed by something that is still growing. Here is the paradox that undoes most of our thinking about rest. We imagine that the kindest thing for an aging body is less effort, less responsibility. Put your feet up, you have earned it. And for a little while that feels like mercy. But a body handed nothing to do, nothing to tend, nothing that depends on it does not thrive in that ease. It fades in it. The mercy becomes the harm. The gardener refused the chair, not out of discipline, out of love for something outside themselves that would not survive their absence. And that refusal, morning after morning, year after year, may have added more good time to their life than any pill they were ever offered. There's a story that gets told in slightly different forms about people who retire from a long working life and are gone within a couple of years, sometimes within months. Fit 1 week, fading the next, as if the body simply read the news that it was no longer required and began to file its own paperwork. You have probably watched a version of it happen to someone you knew. It is not really about the work. It is about the sudden silence where a reason used to be. The garden is one of the few things that can fill that silence completely, because unlike a hobby you can put down, it will not let you. Skip a week in high summer and you come back to ruin, and to a small stubborn voice that says plainly, I still need you. Very little else in a quiet later life speaks to a person that directly. Which finally brings us back to that number. The one in the early data that made no sense, that everyone assumed was an error. Because once you understand purpose, the number stops looking like a typo. It starts looking like the most important thing in the whole study. Here is the number at last. When the researchers looked at people who took up gardening not in easy times, but in the hardest ones, right after a serious illness, after a loss, after the kind of blow that usually marks the start of a steep decline, something happened that should not have been possible. They did better than people who had never been hit at all. That is the part that looked like a mistake. By every rule we know, a major illness or a deep grief accelerates aging. It is supposed to leave you weaker, more fragile, closer to the edge. and for most people it does. But a subset of these gardeners, the ones who responded to the worst moment of their lives by going outside and putting their hands back in the ground, recovered along a curve that bent the wrong way, upward, as if the blow had been absorbed and strangely turned into something else. For years nobody could explain it, so most people ignored it. A number that embarrassing is easy to leave out of the summary, but it would not stay buried because it kept appearing in study after study in different countries with different people. After the loss, the ones who returned to the soil did not just cope. Some of them came back stronger than before. Once you understand everything we have just walked through, the number stops being impossible. Think about what a crisis does. It strips a life down. It takes away the structure, the person, the health, the certainty. It delivers you into exactly that dangerous empty morning, except worse, because now there is grief sitting in the empty space. That is the moment when most bodies begin to close down, because there is suddenly no reason to get up and every reason to stay in the dark. And into that moment, the garden offers the one thing that answers it directly. Not comfort, not distraction, a task, something alive that needs tending today, that does not care how you feel, that will grow if you show up and die if you do not. It pulls you off the edge of the bed and out into the light and down onto your knees in the dirt. And it does this every single morning, gently, without asking permission, until one day you notice you are moving again, sleeping again, present again. The soil bacteria kept nudging the serotonin. The morning light kept resetting the clock. The movement kept the body humming. And the sheer fact of being needed kept dragging the person back into all of it on the exact days they would otherwise have given up. All four forces, aimed at the precise moment a life is most likely to break. No wonder some of them came out the other side stronger. They had accidentally found the most complete medicine we know of, and they took it every day without ever calling it that. That is the number, not a typo, the whole point hiding at the bottom of the page. So what in the end did the researchers write down? After all the years and all the ruling out, when they finally had to say in plain words what the backyard was doing, that answer is simpler than you would think and stranger, and it is where we are going next. Strip away the studies, the blood work, the careful controls, and here is what it came down to. The people who aged best were not doing one powerful thing. They were doing four ordinary things at once, and the backyard was simply the one place on earth where all four happened together every morning, without anyone having to plan it. Light on the eyes early to set the clock. Gentle movement scattered across the whole day, never the long stillness that quietly kills. Living soil on the hands, keeping the immune system in conversation with the world it evolved for. And a reason to get up, something alive that depends on you and will not wait. Any one of these on its own helps. That is why a walk helps, why a window helps, why a pet helps, why a purpose helps. But the garden bundles all four into a single unglamorous habit and delivers them together, day after day, for years for free. That bundling is the secret, because in a real life, people do not keep up four separate health regimens. They will not take the supplement and do the light therapy and attend the class and follow the movement plan, not for 20 years, not all at once. But they will go and see to the beans. And in seeing to the beans, they do all of it without willpower, without a single reminder, because the garden itself is the reminder. This is why it kept beating everything the clinic could offer. Not because any one piece was stronger than modern medicine, because it was the rare thing people actually kept doing, and it worked on four fronts while they did it, and it asked for nothing but their presence. Notice something the researchers were slow to say out loud because it is uncomfortable for a profession built on treatment. Almost none of this is medical. There is no drug in it, no procedure, no specialist. The most protective thing many of these people did for their bodies was something a doctor was never trained to prescribe and cannot bill for, something available to nearly everyone, requiring no wealth, no youth, no special knowledge. A patch of ground and the will to tend it. That is a humbling thing for medicine to admit, and to their credit, some are beginning to. There are doctors now, in a handful of places, who have started to write the strangest of prescriptions. Not a pill, a plot, time in a garden on paper as a treatment. It sounds almost like a joke until you remember it may be one of the best supported interventions any of them has. And when they follow those patients, the results have a way of quieting the skeptics in the room. People who dreaded another medication instead find themselves outside 3 mornings a week, and the numbers the clinic actually measures begin to move. Blood pressure eases, sleep deepens, the low background sadness that no one had a good drug for starts to lift. Some of them arrive barely willing, sure it is a waste of time, and leave months later unable to imagine the week without it. The prescription that costs almost nothing, that no company profits from, keeps outperforming what everyone expected, and the people writing it have learned to stop being surprised. And here is the quiet turn that lands hardest. Every one of us already knows this, somewhere underneath. We know it from the grandmother who kept her roses until she was 90 and stayed sharp as a tack, from the neighbor who was never sick and was always out the back with a trowel. We have all seen the pattern with our own eyes, across our own families, and we filed it under coincidence. It was never coincidence. The researchers just spent 30 years proving what 100 quiet backyard had been showing us the whole time. Which raises the hardest question of all, and we cannot end without it. If this is true, if it is this simple and this powerful and this cheap, then why did we let it go? Why does almost every house that used to have a garden now have a lawn or concrete or nothing at all? What exactly did we trade it for, and did we have any idea what we were giving up? There is a sound that used to belong to the end of the day in almost every neighborhood, and most people alive now have never heard it. It was the sound of people out the back after dinner, the scrape of a hoe, water going onto a bed in the cooling air, a gate, low talk over a fence about whose tomatoes came in first. Every house had its patch, because for most of human history a garden was not a hobby. It was simply part of having a home. You grew things because that is what a yard was for. And then in the span of a single lifetime it mostly vanished. The patch became a lawn, a flat green thing you look at but do not touch, that feeds nobody and needs only a mower. Or it became a patio. Or it became nothing, a strip of gravel behind a fence nobody goes past. The work moved indoors and the food came in a bag and the yard went quiet. Nobody decided this. That is what makes it so easy to miss. There was no moment anyone chose to give it up. It slipped away one convenience at a time, each one perfectly reasonable on its own. Why break your back growing beans when the shop sells them for almost nothing? Why kneel in the dirt when you have earned the right to rest? Why keep a garden when nobody has the time? Every step made sense. The sum of the steps was a generation that quietly lost daily contact with the one habit that had been protecting the bodies of its parents and grandparents. We thought we were trading away drudgery, hard work we were lucky to be free of, and some of it was drudgery, no question. But folded invisibly inside that drudgery was the morning light, and the daily movement, and the living soil, and the reason to rise. We threw out the effort, and without knowing it, we threw out the medicine that had been hidden inside the effort the entire time. There is a photograph almost every family has, somewhere in a drawer if you go back far enough. Someone standing in a backyard beside a row of something they grew, squinting into the sun, hands on hips, a little proud. We look at those old pictures and we feel a soft nostalgia, and we think how quaint, how hard their lives must have been, how glad we are to have moved on. We never stop to wonder whether the person in that photograph, for all their harder life, might have had something we spend our easier one quietly missing. They stood in the light every morning with dirt on their hands and a reason to be there. We have the drawer full of photographs and the sealed clean house, and a growing shelf of bottles trying to buy back what that backyard gave away for free. Look at what replaced it. We now pay for gym memberships to get the movement the garden used to give us for nothing. We buy lamps that mimic sunrise to fix the clock the morning used to set. We take supplements to lift the mood the soil used to lift for free. We seek out counselors and classes and prescriptions to find the sense of purpose that a bed of vegetables used to hand us simply by needing water. We have spent enormous effort and money rebuilding, piece by expensive piece, the exact thing we paved over, and we still do not have it whole because the power was never in any single piece. It was in all of them arriving together, out the back before breakfast for free. This is not an argument for going backward. Nobody is asking you to feed your family from a quarter acre or return to harder time. The point is smaller and more hopeful than that. The thing we lost was never really lost. It was only set down. It is still available, in a pot on a balcony, in a raised bed, in a corner of a yard the size of a kitchen table. It costs almost nothing to pick back up. And the evidence now says that picking it back up, even late, even in your 70s, even after a lifetime away from it, still works. Which brings us back, as promised, to that one small square of turned soil behind an ordinary house, and to the person kneeling over it in the early light. It is time to see it clearly for what it really is. Go back there now. The same patch we started with, no bigger than a kitchen table behind a plain house on a street like 1,000 others. The grass is still wet, the air has not warmed, and the person is out there, 91 years old, on their knees in the dirt, doing the small thing they do every morning without once thinking of it as remarkable. You know now what you are looking at. It is not a hobby. It is not a pretty way to pass a retirement. It is, as far as anyone has been able to measure, one of the most complete forms of medicine a human being can give themselves, and it is disguised as a chore so ordinary that its keeper would be embarrassed to call it anything at all. Every morning, that square of ground sets a clock that the rest of us have let drift. It threads a body with gentle movement while the mind believes it is at rest. It puts living soil against skin and keeps an old immune system in honest conversation with the world. And it does the one thing nothing in a bottle has ever managed. It gives a life that could have quietly stopped a reason to keep getting up, in the shape of something green that will not survive without it. The researchers spent 30 years arriving at what that patch of dirt already knew, that we were never meant to be kept alive from the outside, filled up with the right inputs like a tank. We were meant to tend something, to rise for it, kneel to it, put our hands in it, come back to it tomorrow. The body, it turns out, does not want to be maintained. It wants to be needed. So if you take one thing from all of this, let it be the smallest possible thing, because the smallest possible thing is the whole point. You do not need land. You do not need to be young. You do not need to have done it before. You need a little soil, a little light, and one living thing that will depend on you tomorrow morning. That is the entire prescription. Everything the doctors kept finding behind those houses fits in a single pot on a windowsill. Start it late. Start it clumsy. Start it in your 70s with aching knees and no idea what you are doing. The soil does not check your age, and neither does the light, and neither does the small green thing waiting to be watered. They only ask that you show up. The people who never get sick after 70 were not luckier than you. They were not born with better genes or handed an easier road. They just never stopped kneeling in the dirt for something that needed them, on the ordinary mornings when it would have been easier to stay inside. So plant the one thing, then get up tomorrow and go and see to it.